Welcome to the next lesson called Mind Maps. As I have promised, in this lesson we will systematize everything. I'll give you the clear guide of what and exactly how you should do during a real practical game. You'll see that everything is quite simple, clear and effective. In this course I gave you a lot of different recommendations about endgame play. Maybe it seems hard for you to remember all these ideas. However, please don't worry. There are only a few base ideas which you really need to remember. All other rules are only logical consequences of those basics. You don't need to remember most of the rules. You need to understand them. Okay, let's start. How should you think in an endgame during a practical game? Here is the scheme. First, you need to figure out what is your plan, and secondly, how to realize this plan. Concerning the first step, there are two main endgame plans. You may attack the opponent's weak pawns, or you may use your passed pawns. If only one of these plans is possible in a certain position, then it's exactly what you should do. If you can realize both of these plans, that's great. You should realize both of them. Thus you will stretch an opponent's defense. When you decide what your plan is, you should go to the second step. Think about every piece you have and ask yourself how I can use it to realize my plan. After that, you will know clearly what and exactly how you should play. This scheme is the only thing which you need to memorize and to keep in your mind while playing. It's quite simple and you'll have no problems here. Now we'll analyze this scheme in more details. You don't have to memorize the following rules, you need to understand them. If you understand them well enough, they will become natural for you and you will follow them automatically. Now let's talk about the first step in more details. What is the correct plan and how you can find it? Endgame plans are closely connected with the pawn structure. In an endgame, you don't have enough pieces to attack an opponent's king. His pieces are too mobile to attack them. Therefore, a pawn structure is the main thing you should think about. Regarding to the opponent's pawns, you should attack his weaknesses. Regarding to your pawns, you should move your passed pawns. These are two main endgame plans. Let's focus on the first plan now. If you're going to attack the opponent's weaknesses, then you need to find them first. The opponent's weak pawns are isolated pawns, backward pawns, and advanced pawns. These are the objects of your attack. Now we come to the next question. How to attack these weaknesses? There are three main ideas here. First, you should weaken the opponent's pawns, provoke him to move pawns. This will make it simpler for you to attack them in the future. Secondly, you should fix the opponent's weaknesses. Thus you will concentrate your pieces for an attack and he will not be able to remove this weakness. And of course you shouldn't exchange pawns because you will rather prefer to win them. Okay, this is how you should attack the opponent's weak pawns. I hope that everything is clear and we may go to the second plan. There are 5 types of passed pawns. Each type has some special properties. When you have a separate passed pawn, you should focus your attention on its advancement. Don't be deflected by something else. Two connected passed pawns, these are very powerful because they often give you a new queen. One of the main winning plans in an endgame is to create connected passed pawns. A protected passed pawn gives you a stable advantage because your opponent can't capture it. You may simply push this pawn forward or you may use the principle of two weaknesses. Start playing on another side of the board and stretch an opponent's defense. A distant passed pawn helps you to deflect an opponent's pieces and to stretch his defense. The principle of two weaknesses works again. To create a distant passed pawn, you should take a side from center. A pawn majority will give you a passed pawn most likely. That's why all the same rules work here. You should advance your pawn majority and especially pawn without a counterpart. Okay, that's all that you need to know about endgame plans. Do you think it's too much? Then look at the tons of endgame books and encyclopedias. By the way, recently I got Nalim of table bases. It's 43 gigabytes of variations on 9 DVDs. Well, you see, I'm offering you the simplest way to play endgames efficiently. Okay, we have been talking about endgame plans. Now we arrive to the second step: how to realize the plan. You need to think about how to use your pieces to realize the plan. There are a lot of ready-made recommendations which will make your life easy during a game. The king becomes an active piece in the endgame. Same with all other pieces, it is the most active in a center. Often you need to centralize your king under the lee of other pieces. Of course you want to make an opposite thing for your opponent's king. You should cut it off and leave it out of a game. There is one special technique for a king. It works best with pawns. You can penetrate into an opponent's territory and attack his pawns by your king. It's a very powerful idea. Also, a king supports your passed pawns very well. The queen should also be centralized in the endgame. The more pieces you trade, the more centralized the queen should be. To use the full power of a queen, you should attack in many directions. A queen should support your passed pawns, attack an opponent's weaknesses, and make checks or attack the opponent's king. Everything is quite simple with rooks. Rooks need open files, thus you should move pawns and open a position. A rook should stand behind the passed pawn. It doesn't matter whether it's your pawn or an opponent's one. Bishop also need open lines. You should play on both flanks to use the full power of a bishop. A bishop works well with pawns. In sharp positions, when you need to stop opponent's pawns and push your pawns, a bishop becomes very powerful. Sometimes it can even struggle against a rook successfully. A knight is relatively weak in an endgame. It can play only on one side and it struggles with side pawns badly. The knight's advantages are on his tactical possibilities. It can attack opponent's weak pawns, make forks, and so on. Also, a knight can restrict an opponent's king sometimes. We've been talking a lot about pawns in the first step of planning. Generally, there are only two main recommendations here. First, you should be very careful with pawn moves. Don't move them when it's not necessary. Otherwise, you create long-term weaknesses in your position. Secondly, you should move your passed pawns. Also, there is a very important rule concerning to pawn exchange in an endgame. An attacker side should avoid pawn exchange and try to win pawns instead. A defensive side should trade pawns to complicate an opponent's task. All these rules give you a guideline about how to use every single piece in an endgame. You don't even need to think much during a game because you already know what to do. Since you have a little quantity of pieces, you should coordinate its activity, develop a real and powerful attack. Your pieces should supplement each other. Most often it's enough to keep them closely to each other for this purpose. By the way, when you digest all this information, you will raise your general level of chess understanding. It will certainly bear a positive influence on your game and your practical results. We have discussed both steps of an endgame planning in details. Now you know what to do and how to do it. In this course, I've also been telling you about an endgame master style. An endgame play has some specific properties. Sometimes it's even not about chess, but about a player's psychology. This style of playing will make you not just a good player, but an outstanding endgame master. I'm serious here. A very little quantity of players can play endgame well. With this course, you have good chances to join this VIP club. Here is the scheme concerning an endgame style. First, stable positional factors become the most important in an endgame, and that's why you should collect stable positional advantages. The stable advantages are material advantage, opponent's weaknesses, his weak pawns and squares, and your passed pawns. There are two important rules about material in an endgame. The first rule is first take and then think. Since you should collect stable advantages, you should take a material if you can. The second, the bishops and pawns value goes up in an endgame. This useful rule helps you to understand easily all the positions with unequal material. There is another important practical rule here. When you have stable positional advantages, you should transfer the game into an endgame. It will make it simpler for you to realize your advantage. In an endgame, there are not so much pieces on the board. This determines some specific properties of an endgame. First, you should use the principle of two weaknesses. Your opponent doesn't have many pieces, and you can stretch his defense. Secondly, you can totally restrict an opponent's counterplay. There are a few ideas for this purpose. You should prepare the realization of your plan very well. Protect everything in advance, improve positions of all your pawns and pieces. Only then you may start the aggressive actions. Concerning an opponent's position, you should limit an activity of his pieces and exchange his active pieces. A limitation of an opponent's counterplay is a very powerful idea because it gives you a strategically winning position. The last important trait of an endgame master is that he torments his opponent. It means that you're going to use all the resources to complicate an opponent's task. There are two main things you need to do here. Constantly create simple threats and make a lot of moves. Tons of equal endgames were won by endgame masters using this weapon. Once again, I'd like to mention that you shouldn't try to mechanically memorize all these rules. You should understand them. They are all very logical, and you need to understand this logic. For example, the second and the third items become important in an endgame because of lower quantity of pieces on the board. Also, these two items are closely connected with the fourth item. They help you to complicate an opponent's life and to make an unpleasant situation for him. The endgame style is something you need to feel. You should look at the games of endgame experts and try to adopt this style. Then it will become a part of your chess nature and you will follow it automatically. The practical part of the course will help you with that. All these graphical schemes are available for printing. When you finish with this lesson, please go to the section for printing and print these documents. This will help you to always have the key moments in front of your eyes and to digest them better. Also, you may like to use them while making the tasks of the practical part.